Alright, today we want to talk about finding the midpoint of 2 points. First in 1 dimension, then in 2 dimensions. Okay, so before I actually tell you how to find the midpoint, we look at this example here. We've got P at -3, Q at 1, just on a number line. Right? What's the midpoint? What's the point right in the middle of those two? How'd you get that? It's in the middle. Okay. Is there a mathematical reason why that's right in the middle? It's halfway.
They're the same distance from.
They're the same distance from that point. That's a good way of putting it. Is there a way that we could come up with a formula? If we weren't given a number line, right? It's easy to kind of visualize, well, that's right there in the middle, right? They're the same distance. What if I just told you I've got a point at 6 and a point at 1? How would we find what point is right in between them? Say it again. Yeah, so if we're using 2 points, right? So if I give you another one, right? If I say A is at 6 and B is at 1, what's the point that's right in between 6 and 1? Three, 4, 3.5. How'd you get that? So the answer is 3.5. It is. So I heard a few people say 3.5. How'd you get 3.5? Amber? Okay, a little bit over. All right. Kate?
Half of 6 is 3, and then half of 1, half, then add it again. And it works with that. It's half of 3 is 1.5. Oh no. Leave that. Let's see.
Well, no, it does work with that. So you're almost there. You're definitely on the right track here. So taking half of each of those, right? So half of -3 is -3 halves. Half of 1 is a half. 1 half plus -3 halves is -1. So that works, right? What Katie just did was essentially take the average of those numbers. The midpoint is the same idea as the average. How do we find the average of 2 things? Right. Add those things together and divide by the number of things you add. So if we're only using 2 things, we're going to add those 2 things together and divide by 2. That's the formula. Okay? Coordinate of the midpoint of the segment, if I've got just 2 numbers, is those 2 numbers added together, divided by 2. Right? So, -3 plus 1 is -2. -2 divided by 2 is -1. Okay? It's the same idea. If I want to find the distance, find the midpoint between two-dimensional coordinates. Yeah. So if we're finding a midpoint, that's going to be between 2 points. Yeah, so unless we come up with some funky problem where we're trying to find a midpoint between 3 points, I don't even know how we would do that, we're going to divide by 2. All right? So similarly, if I've got 2 coordinate points, right, in 2 dimensions, I'm going to take the x coordinates, add them together, and divide by 2. to get my new x coordinate. And then take the y coordinates, add them together, and divide by 2 to get my new y coordinate. Okay? All we're doing to find midpoint is taking the average. Okay? If I'm just given one dimension, I'm just taking the average of those two numbers. If I'm talking about 2 dimensions, right, on a coordinate plane, I'm going to take the average of the x coordinates and separately take the average of the y coordinates. Okay? So, in this example 2 down here, okay, we're finding the midpoint of -2, 4 and 4, 1. So, I'm just going to add my x coordinates together. So, -2 and 4. Divide that by 2. And then I'm going to take my y coordinates, 4 and 1, and add those together and divide by 2. -2 plus 4 is 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1. 4 plus 1 is 5. 5 divided by 2 is 2.5, or we could just leave it as fraction, 5 over 2. Okay, so all midpoint is the average. Questions? All right, let's take a couple of minutes and try a couple of these here. Okay. The one-dimensional ones, hopefully, will go pretty quickly. Okay, and then we can jump down, find the coordinates. Find the coordinates of the midpoint of these 2-dimensional ones. Okay, so let's, take 7 or 8 minutes here and try a few of these. You guys can work together, right? Talk about these, make sure that you are all getting the same answers. Did we get answers like this?
Yeah, they are.
So, would you rather assume fractions or just?
I would actually probably prefer fractions, but it doesn't really matter.
Well, either way, I just know some teachers like this subway. Yes, I really do. Did you know that?
Any questions on any of these? Any that we want to see? Did pretty good. No questions? Cool.
The bottom ones, I'm still like misnumbered. Would you mind just going through?
Sure. Anyone in particular?
No.
Okay. So, like 13?
Yeah.
Alright, so we can label our points if we want, but then we're just taking the average of the x coordinates, so I'm going to add them together. So my two x's are 10 and 9, so I'll do 10 plus 9 divided by 2. And then my y coordinates, I will do -22 plus 10 divided by 2. So 10 plus 9 is 19 divided by 2. -22 plus 10 would be -12. Then 19 divided by 2 would be 9.5, or we could just leave it as this improper fraction. Either way. And then -12 divided by 2 would be -6. Any others? Alright, then let's flip over to the back. Alright, so on the back, we're going to look at distances other than a half. Okay, so on the front was all, what's the point right in the middle? Okay, now we're going to say, well, what's the point maybe 1/3 of the way or 1/4 of the way? Okay. So if we're just doing this in one dimension, okay, the first thing we want to do is find the total distance between our points in question. So in this example, okay, I've got A at -4, B at 5. What's the total distance between those points? Okay, 9, right? So again, we could either count the boxes or just take the larger number minus the smaller number, right? 5 minus -4 gets me 9. Okay? So that distance between 5 and -4 is 9, right? We're just thinking about distance between those two numbers on a number line. So now, the question says, find some point x that is 1/3 of the distance from A to B. If I know the total distance is 9, what's 1/3 of that distance? 3, right? So we just take 1/3 of that total distance. Now we know that A is at -4. I want to go a distance of 1/3 of that total distance. So I want to go a distance of 3 from A. So I'm starting at -4, and I'm going to go a distance of 3 to get to my final coordinate of -1. Okay? So on the number line here, our point x, that is 1/3 of the distance from A to B, is at -1. Less? I guess I forgot to fill in this one, right? So x is 3 units from point A. So x is located at our starting point. What's that? Yeah, that's it. Right? In one dimension, all we're saying is, well, if I want to go a fractional distance, I'm going to take the whole distance, multiply by that fraction, and then start at my starting point and go that distance. You okay with that one? All right, so let's try this one exercise down here. Okay, just number 1, and then we'll come back to the 2-dimensional examples. So on this one, we want to find x, find some point x on ST that is 1/5 of the distance from S to T. So first we need to find that total distance, multiply it by the fraction that we want, and then go that distance from our starting point. So give this one a try here. We get that x is at -5. Okay, so that the total distance between S and T should be 10. I want 1/5 of that distance. So 1/5 of 10 is 2. So I'm going to start at -7 and go a distance of 2. I end up at -5. You okay with that? Alright, so the final thing then is just to do this in 2 dimensions. So let's jump back up to example 2 here. Alright, so the only difference, we're just going to do this distance thing twice. Okay? So I want to find the distance between the x coordinates and then separately find the distance between the y coordinates. Okay? I'm just going to do that same process twice. So we can even think of creating a triangle, right, if we want. I'm just going to find the x distance and find the y distance. So first, I want to find the x distance between C and D. Well, in other words, the length of the bottom of this triangle. What would that be? Eight, right? If I'm starting at -4 and ending at +4, that x distance is 8. Okay? Well, now, if I know that that x distance is 8, x distance is 8, I want 1/4 of that. So 1/4 of 8 is 2. Right? So 1/4 of that x distance is 2. Well, now that I know that's the distance I need to travel along the x's. So I start at -4 and I go a distance of 2 along the x's. Well, that's going to bring me to -2. Right? So -4 plus 2 gets me that my x coordinate is -2. Now I just do the same thing with the y's. So the distance between my y coordinates, or another way of saying that is the length of this side of the triangle is 4. Okay, but I want 1/4 of that. So my y distance is 4, and then 1/4 of my y distance. 1/4 of 4 would just be 1. Right? So now I want to add that to the y coordinate of C. So the y coordinate of C is at -2. So -2 plus this distance gets me that my y coordinate is at -1. Meaning this coordinate point right here is my answer. Point at -2, -1. That is the coordinate point that is 1/4 of the distance from C to D. Okay, so all we did was take we found the x distance, took 1/4 of that, added that on to my original x coordinate. The same process with the y's. Found the total y distance, took 1/4 of that, and then added that distance on to my original y coordinate. You okay with that process? If you want, in your notes, I would star this example. We'll come back to it later because there is always one air question just like this. Alright, so this is an important one to get the hang of. Alright. No questions?